Okay, so we've been talking about Marxism in the first 4 or 5 videos, whatever it is, should serve as the framework for understanding Marxism. Um, and Marxism, of course, from the philosopher Karl Marx, we talked about capitalism and socialism. We've talked about false consciousness. We talked about religion as an opiate, class conflict, et cetera, and the metaphysics behind it, and his understanding of economics and ideology. But I want to focus now on Marx's critique of capitalism in particular. And that will involve 2 parts. There'll be 2 parts to this. What I call the ethical critique of capitalism and the spiritual critique of capitalism. So Marx's critique of capitalism, as I see it, has 2 really powerful pillars to it. One ethical, one spiritual. This video will talk about the ethical critique of capitalism. And by the way, many people who aren't socialists or Marxists or communists, whatever, nevertheless find something unique and interesting and true in Marx's critique of capitalism. So this is a very relevant, I would say, video. And a lot of the things he says are really assumed in a lot of critical theory, which we've said comes from Marxism and various iterations of critical theory. Okay, so the first part, Marx's ethical critique of capitalism, Marx argues, plain and simple, capitalism is fundamentally unethical or unjust, okay? And why does he say that? Well, it hangs on one particular idea, namely his understanding of value. And his understanding of value is what's come to be known as the labor theory of value. He put this forth in a book called Das Kapital, or Capital, the labor theory of value. So Marx's ethical critique of capitalism hangs on the labor theory of value. And what does that mean? Well, it means very simply that this shirt, if it cost $2 to make this shirt, that's what the shirt is worth. The labor theory of value says the real value of something is the labor put into it, or the socially necessary labor time, the labor that it takes to make something. Everything else for Marx is manipulated. Supply and demand, rigged. And they're rigged in order to exploit. So Marx's ethical critique of capitalism hangs on the labor theory of value, that is, that something is worth only what it costs to make, okay? So think of it this way. If this shirt costs $2 to make, that's what it's worth. Therefore, if that's true, then when I sell it for $50 or $100 or whatever it is and make $98 profit, which is, of course, the goal of business, is to make a profit. So I have to keep costs low, and I have to, according to capitalism, I have to either sell it in order to make a profit. I have to sell it for more than it's worth and pay the worker less than it's worth. So let's say I hire people in a factory or whatever. I'm the bourgeois who owns the means of production, and I pay people hourly rate to make these shirts, and it's nowhere near what the cost of selling these shirts would gain me, okay? Or what the profit I would gain from selling the shirts. So this is the key idea, that if I sell something for more than it's actually worth, and what is it worth? The amount of labor time put into it. I'm exploiting both the consumer who buys it and the worker who's made it. Okay, so if I'm the bourgeois paying an hourly wage, let's say it's $20 an hour, but he or she or whoever is making dozens and dozens of these, and I'm making profit. I'm exploiting the worker and I'm exploiting the consumer who buys it. So this is the key idea here. For Marx to think that the capitalism is unethical and unjust, he needs to have a theory of value that allows for profit to be unjust, which leads to the exploitation of the worker and the consumer. Okay. Now, I was on a panel once, and somebody asked me, we were talking about Marxism. This is a panel of professors, and they said, well, surely, Dwayne, you agree with Marx's critique of capitalism, even if you're not a socialist or Marxist. And I said, no. And they said, why? And I said, well, I don't agree with the labor theory of value. That is, and so I'm showing my cards here. I don't agree with this, but some people do. Most economists, I would say, don't. And the question we need to ask is something worth simply, or is the value of something simply what it costs to make? Or is it rather dependent on other things like supply and demand, i.e. what someone's willing to pay for it? I don't know. Think of it this way. Is something worth what it costs to make, or is it worth what you're willing to pay for it, or what somebody is willing to pay for it? And that would include then how much availability there is, how much supply there is, how much demand there is for it. Supply and demand seem to work hand in hand. Nevertheless, the heart of Marx's ethical critique of capitalism concerns the labor theory of value and his understanding of value as the socially necessary labor time put into making something. If you think value is determined some other way in society, then there's a problem with Marxism. However, if you buy the labor theory of value, I know many people who buy this and say, no, this is exactly right. Now, the question, you could also ask the question, is Marx saying this ought to be what something is worth, but it in fact isn't? That might be more convincing for someone like me. Nevertheless, ethical critique of capitalism hangs on the labor theory of value, because in order to make a profit, you have to keep costs low, you have to pay workers less, and consumers, you have to charge more than the value of the object or whatever you're selling.